At number 9, I have the 1983 LA Raiders. Now, the Raiders had won a Super Bowl title 3 years earlier, and they were trying to get back on top. They felt like they had the team to do it again. They had Jim Plunkett. Also, they still retained a lot of defensive players from the previous Super Bowl. So they felt like they were ready to roll. And roll they did to start the 1983 season. As a matter of fact, the Raiders got off to a dominant 4-0 start. They definitely had their losses here and there. But in November, they really hit their stride as they went on a 5-game winning streak. And then to finish up, and then in the final game of the season at home, they dominated the San Diego Chargers 30-14 to finish with a 12-4 record. That gave them the AFC West title, as well as the number 1 seed in the AFC. And they had 6 Pro Bowlers in Rod Martin, Van McElroy, Greg Pruitt, Lester Hayes, Ted Hendricks, Henry Lawrence, Howie Long, Rod Martin. If I said Rod Martin already, I apologize. Lester Hayes. And the Raiders, they definitely had it going on both sides of the ball. Of course, when you have Marcus Allen, you definitely going to be on point offensively. They were top 10 in every offensive category. They finished 7th in offense, averaging 355 yards per game. They were 9th in passing, averaging 215 passing yards per game. They were 10th in rushing, averaging 140 rushing yards per game. They were 2nd in passing touchdowns, which they finished with 31 passing touchdowns. That averaged out to 1.9 TDs per game. They were 8th in rushing touchdowns. They finished with 18 rushing touchdowns, which averaged out to 1.12 rushing touchdowns per game. And they were 3rd in points, as they averaged 27 points per game. And they were also pretty dominant on the defensive side of the ball. Now, they had some mixed rankings as far as defense. They were 4th in defense, giving up 296 yards per game. They were 18th in pass defense, giving up 197 passing yards per game. They were 4th in rushing defense, giving up 99 rushing yards per game. They were 13th in points allowed, giving up 21 points per game. They were 19th in sacks, which they finished with 57 sacks that, equaled out to 3.5 sacks per game. They were 21st in takeaways, which they created 36. Now, the Raiders put the regular season behind them, and they were definitely ready to roll in the playoffs, get back to the Super Bowl, and win it once again. And they had home field advantage at the LA Coliseum, where the Black Hole is loud, proud, rowdy, and intimidating. They will host the number 3 seeded Pittsburgh Steelers in the Black Hole, and they which was a fierce playoff rivalry. Of course, the immaculate interception by the late Franco Harris happened against the Raiders. So these two teams didn't like each other. There was always bad blood between them. But the Raiders would dominate them 38-10. Then in the AFC Championship, they would take on the number 4 seeded Seattle Seahawks and dominate them 30-14 as they went back to the Super Bowl for the first time in 3 years. And they were definitely ready to prove that they were legit and were ready to finish off this season with another Lombardi to the Raiders trophy case. But standing in their way was definitely a worthy opponent, the defending Super Bowl champion Washington Redskins. And the Redskins, they had a pretty good playoff run, and they were looking to go back-to-back, but they were too much for, well, the Raiders showed that they did not belong on the same field, and they came out and dominated the Redskins in Super Bowl 18, 38-9. And it was all capped off by Marcus Allen's now memorable long touchdown run. That's still one of the most iconic plays in Super Bowl history. And Marcus Allen was named Super Bowl MVP, rightfully so, as he had a very dominant game. He finished with almost 200 yards. He only had 191 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Jim Plunkett, he was pretty solid. He finished with 16 completions on 25 attempts, 172 yards, a touchdown with a 0.4 QBR rating. Cliff Branch did pretty nice. He had 94 receiving yards and a touchdown. And Marcus Allen even had 18 receiving yards. But this was their second Super Bowl in 3 years. Also, some records set in this Super Bowl. The highest passer rating by Jim Plunkett, 122.8. As well as the highest completion percentage by Plunkett, as he completed 63% of his passes. This is still a Super Bowl record. Most rushing yards in a game, Marcus Allen's 191 rushing yards, as well as the longest rushing touchdown, which was 74 yards. And that was from the line of scrimmage. So some history was made here in Super Bowl 18. Now, I picked the 83 LA Raiders because doing my research, this team was pretty dominant on both sides of the ball. And also, they don't get their just due. Yeah, Marcus Allen definitely gets remembered for that 74-yard TD run, but this was a very talented team. Now, Plunkett, he definitely did his thing in those 2 Super Bowls, but if they would have had a younger quarterback, maybe the Raiders would have won a couple of more of those Super Bowls back in the 80s, that were eventually won by teams like the Giants, Redskins, and 49ers as they, started their dynasty around that time. Also, this team has Hall of Fame players that were just definitely beasts back in the day. Of course, Marcus Allen and Howie Long, they're both in Canton. As well as the late Cliff Branch. Also, Tom Flores, the head coach of both of those Super Bowl teams, he's in the Hall of Fame. Matter of fact, definitely had the pleasure of speaking with him on the Zoom call in 2021 when he first got inducted. Man, that was just a treat talking to him. And also hearing his stories about the 1980 divisional playoff game against the Browns in that cold. Also, you have Ted Hendricks that's in the Hall of Fame as well. So this team was pretty dominant. And who knows what they could have done if they would have made some minor moves. Maybe they could have went on the run that the 49ers went on in the 80s, or maybe they do win another Super Bowl. But this team was definitely talented, and also they also made some can't talk. But also they made some history in this Super Bowl for the longest rushing touchdown run, completion percentage by a QB, as well as passer rating. So the 83 Raiders definitely deserve more respect and definitely should be looked at more highly than what they are.